Hello and welcome to Connected Truths. My name is Steve, your host, and I'll be stepping you through this brief introductory video. Short and sweet, won't take up too much of your time. It'll give you the gist of what this is all about. Start off with this little bit of information here because people don't really know a great deal about this subject. I find when I ask them, they haven't really come into contact with this kind of information in the past. Don't really know that much about it, except maybe a vague recollection of something they saw at school once or perhaps in a job. So, what makes people tick? Big question on a lot of people's minds quite often. This is all tied to behavioural traits and the great genetic lottery, as I like to put it. And I can answer these questions in terms of most definitely there are patterns in human behaviour. Yes, complete self-awareness is possible. And why would people want or need this information? Well, that's a easy one for me to answer at this point. So let's just move to the next slide. These are the areas that I find over the years, and I've been doing this for well over 30 years now. These are the categories that the information tends to help people in. Singles looking for life skills coaching. This doesn't necessarily have to be the person themselves that organises it. Quite often I've had parents organise it for teenagers at a point in their life where they're looking at career guidance, or just parents wanting help with an unruly teenager who's not finding their way in life terribly well. Moving on from there, those different scenarios. Marriage partner compatibility advice. I've had clients, quite often engaged couples, coming to, I guess, do the one last check before they tie the knot to make sure that they're not going to end up with what nobody thinks about before they get married, a divorce. Very wise of them to do that. Not everybody thinks to do that, but of course not everybody's thinking about divorce necessarily when they go to get married. So nobody knows the future, of course, but those who are wise spend more of their time becoming so well informed that they make better choices about the future that they make. Couples counselling and coaching is a big one. A lot of people find that great difficulties. You meet a persona, you marry a personality, but you have to live with a character, and underpinning that character is a temperament, and that temperament aspect dictates a great deal in terms of how they think, how they feel, even down to listening, how they filter and interpret and misinterpret very often. So that's a big one, and invariably couples who, well, I shouldn't say invariably because it doesn't always work. Some people should really just not get married in the first place. They really are quite incompatible on many levels, not just the temperament level. But quite often, people who did think that they wanted a divorce after having sessions with my material and skills that I've developed over the years to help get it across, realise that they don't actually need a divorce. So excuse me, you could argue that's a good thing in many ways, certainly for kids of the marriage. Career advice and coaching, obviously already mentioned that with the singles part with teenagers, but you'd be surprised. A lot of people find themselves, even 40 years of age, still don't really know what their calling, if you like, if you can put it a certain way, like calling versus just a career. So they find this very helpful in terms of finding a career that will fit with their temperament and therefore be very satisfying work. Team building and coaching with organisations is a big one. Process management, mapping and training is also a big one. You'd be surprised at how many organisations very poorly run because they just don't have a way of seeing how the whole operation should be operating according to a good quality plan, etc., versus how it actually is operating, and neither do they know really what their people are actually doing. So job description's not written very well, etc., etc. So that's a big area. Decision management training, that's I found that's a popular one with people because Most of them tell me that they've never actually seen anything in their life through school, university, not once did they get any kind of teaching on just decision making, decision management. And of course, communication skills training is a big one, but it's not necessarily the difficulty I have in presenting this is everybody will have their own idea of what these words evoke in their mind, and my mind obviously goes straight to the underlying deep core temperament and the deep core value that is driven by that temperament. And so very often the communication is not just surface level words for words, people listening and hearing, listening and speaking, but also in terms of that all important aspect of interpreting. So at the very minimum, you could say that communication is both a spoken word skill as well as an interpretive words skill. And that's very often where things go terribly awry, especially for couples. But you find it everywhere: social groups, work, professional settings, etc. Okay, so moving along, I wanted to cover this as a basic introductory session prior to you watching the video that I have in mind. Just before we do that, I'll leave you with this thought that this is my areas of research where I pulled all of this together. You get to read about it on the website, but this gives you an indication of the amount of work. It took me 8 years altogether before I finally deciphered how everything fits together, and it really is life-changing information. Many aspects of your life changes once you know how all of this works. So having said all that, we'll cut to the video and I'll come back with a little bit more information on what the topic of the video is, and you'll get the gist of how many of the areas of work that I've done can indeed help people a great deal in what it is they're dealing with.
Hi guys, Steve here with just a short explainer video covering some of the sorts of concepts that I share with clients. This being in the realm of conflict resolution, an ancient Greek idea actually from ancient Greek philosophers, and it's developed over the centuries by a few notable philosophers, namely Hegel. The concept is essentially that you start with a thesis, which is anybody's idea, argument, hypothesis, etc. And the concept of incompleteness is present here in this sense because you've got an antithesis where someone's going to argue with it, and therefore it is not acceptable to them. The idea being conflict resolution, in that you get the best of both arguments to form the synthesis. So if I was to give you let's say a political example, we would have here in Australia Labor politicians, Liberal on the other side, and in the synthesis you may see the idea of perhaps a true democracy party, whereby the best of both worlds is brought into being. Now, you can clearly see, in a sense, what we have up here is an adversarial model, and of course down here a cooperative model. So I quite often teach clients, particularly married, arguing clients. They're having difficulties in the relationship because they are not able to come to an agreement. I call it the third better way based on this model, because you get the idea of the best of both, and it's a synthesis, it isn't a compromise. Okay, well that pretty much gives you the gist and an idea of the sorts of concepts that I share with people, which invariably helps them to see things a different way. And along these lines of the picture paints 1,000 words, word pictures in particular. Catch you on the next one, guys. Thanks for watching.
Okay, welcome back. Obviously, this video that you've just seen is fairly self-explanatory, and I say obviously, and I use the word self-explanatory, but having said everything I said earlier in the introduction, you could be forgiven for thinking that now communication is something that you'd want to take a look at because of this interpretive skills part of it. So I'll move into this slide here because as you can see over on this side of the screen, I've put this judiciously, this one of my quotable quotes. There's always more to learn, especially about the things that you think you already know. And of course, you've just watched a video that's explained something and now you think that you know about it, and indeed you do. But there's a big difference between knowing of something and knowing all about something. So I'll give you a little bit more information, and I normally don't insult people's intelligence by reading things out to them, but I will in this instance because I think this is necessary. Obviously, you've seen the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis aspects in the video. This is a bit of a history here of the dialectical method in its most basic form. It was a discourse, described as a discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to establish the truth through reasoned, factual arguments. Now, it's been developed through the centuries, as I mentioned in the video, excuse me, further developed by, in particular, Hegel, as an interpretive method in which the contradiction between a thesis and its antithesis is resolved through synthesis. Dialectic is the art of discussing or debating which seeks to resolve the conflict between two opposing theories rather than disprove any one of them, and refers to the branch of logic that teaches the rules and modes of reasoning. And as you can see in the footnote down there, Aristotle attributes the dialectic, the invention of the dialectic, to Zeno of Elea. Now, I'll move to this next slide because I've given you a much better picture summary of that video. And you can see over here I've listed all of the different contributors to the idea over the centuries, all the way from Zeno, as if indeed Aristotle is correct, which has no reason to think that he's not, through to Hegel via Kant. Now, I won't labour too much on this because you've pretty much seen it, except to reiterate the idea of the adversarial model and the cooperative model before I show you the next slide, which will put this into context, and it includes this slide in the centre of the story. So as you can see here, you've got to understand that excuse me, the person behind the thesis as well as the person behind the antithesis have all got this stuff going on. Memory, accurate, inaccurate, or even false. I've been shocked myself at times how I've, reminiscing with the wife about something that happened 10 years ago, we've both got a totally different picture of what happened at that particular event, both having seen it obviously from our own perspective on the day in space and time, but also through the filter of our particular temperament. So this is a massive area in terms of human dynamics, in terms of how things go awry, where people will swear on a stack of Bibles, but only to later discover that they were only getting a partial view of it. And I contrast truth in the sense of you can have partial truth, you can have isolated truth, or you can have whole truth. And very often we humans are only dealing with the first two. Very, very partial, very, very isolated, and very rarely do we get to see the whole truth of any particular matter or subject for that matter. A lot of clients, after they've done the Knowledge is Power series, are very complimentary about these pictures that paint 1,000 words that I do, because they wish that they'd been taught like this at school. I do too, which is part of the reason why I obviously came up with doing things this way. I wish that I'd been taught this way at school too. I'm sure I would have done a lot better, as they all say they would have been much better able to get through it all. Now, influences here in terms of good, different, bad, or even toxic. You can have these toxic influences that are dictating what a person is pushing as their thesis. Same on the other side, of course, as the antithesis. Truth and lie, verification is the big aspect that's very often missing in people's lives. They don't bother verifying anything, they just believe without question. But your preconceptions are another large area in terms of these dynamics, where you've got... I have a particular picture, paints 1,000 words. I won't show it to you now. This is just meant to be a quick introductory session, but genes, memes, and maturity, you'll get to see that if you decide to come and do some work with me. Experiences, obviously, here can be good, neutral, bad, or even tragic. And if that's the frame of reference that people are coming from, that's going to have a large influence on this component that they're pushing as their thesis. And that, of course, I've highlighted in red here, the inborn temperament traits, learned behaviours, personal maturity and wisdom, that is part of that picture that I show, that you will no doubt be interested in seeing later, if indeed you get interested in doing this work. So the best of both, none of the bad from either, is very crucial here. So, it's often not enough for me to say to people, it's a third better way, it's not a compromise. You want that third better way to be devoid of the bad stuff from both. If I had this new political party, let's say, imagine I started, I wouldn't want any of the bad from here or here. I want all the good ideas from these guys, all the great ideas from these guys, and then all of those great ideas all driving what's going on here and leaving the bad behind. And of course, it has to be a better way for both, not a worse way for either. And for this to work, both sides must be reasonable and have good intent. This does not work with toxic people. Best thing you can do with a person who's become obvious to you, coming from a very toxic background, or even a very toxic mindset that possibly is part of why they've got a toxic background, you better off knowing when not to engage than you are engaging, because you sure as heck can ruin your life in many different ways. And I've had clients over the years crying their story out to me of how their lives have indeed been ruined. Very often, people marrying the wrong person turns out to have very, very toxic personality, etc. Now, I've put Covey's Philosophies of Human Interaction here, and many of you doubtless will be familiar. It was a big selling book of its time back in the 80s, but those who don't, the thing you need to understand here is win-win or no deal. You can agree to disagree agreeably. You don't have to do the transaction. You don't have to do the deal. Very often it's very wise to learn how to say no up front, walk away. Okay, so having covered all of this, I wasn't going to show this last slide, but I will. I'll leave it there as I end the video. The outline of the scientific method. Obviously, I didn't get to do all of this work without following what is a marvelous method. This is just an outline of it, but it's quite a good outline, and it gives you the gist that here, obviously, subjectivity versus objectivity is an important concept to fully understand, as is rigorous skepticism. But most people don't realise that much of that skepticism needs to be aimed at your own flawed thought processes. And we human beings have many such flawed thought processes, but because we're so subjective, we just don't know it. And nobody can tell you, especially not people who know you reasonably well enough to get a gist of what they are, because there's the human aspect of pride. So this is difficult. This is once again why in my work I'm that objective person that the parent sends the unruly teenager to. They get to hear it. So I have an old adage that I share with people that many people can relate to. Once I've said it, they realise, that's so true. Perfect stranger can come to the door and knock on it and tell your spouse something that you've been telling them for the last 10 years and they weren't hearing or listening to, and they believe it instantly as soon as the stranger at the door's told them. So amusing, but actually it's funny because there's a certain aspect there of familiarity where people go, oh yeah, they'd be right. So this is an interesting area of my work where I'm able to do that objective thing. Many couples come, quite often one of the partners has bought the spouse to get them fixed, so to speak. And of course they get to find out what their own set of weaknesses are during these sessions, and then realise that it's not a matter of just fixing one spouse in the relationship. It's a matter of teaching both spouses how to maximise their core temperament strengths, whilst minimising their weaknesses. Anyway, as I said, this is meant to be a quick intro, and my difficulty with all of my material is they are pictures that paint 1,000 words, and of course I feel compelled to say the 1,000 words once those pictures are up. So I won't in this instance, and will doubtless be able to have a look at this if you decide to get your first free session and see if you want to see more of this. Ask me and we'll discuss how any of it impacts your life at the current time. Okay, we'll end it there. Thanks very much for tuning in, and catch you later. Excuse me once again. Very froggy voice throughout all of this stuff. Not been terribly well the last few days, and it's taking its toll. Just this is an addendum obviously to the video, and I just wanted to, this came out, this news story, just as I'd finished, happened to cross it quite fortuitously, and seems to, I guess, highlight what I've been talking about. Obviously this article is doing the rounds in the major tabloids, etc., talking about the unusual reasons behind Australian marriages ending, showing a 13% increase in 2021, over 56,000 divorces granted that year, and the lawyers stating the big four: domestic abuse, infidelity, lack of communication and compatibility, and financial issues were among other leading reasons. It'd be nice if we could see statistics, percentages on these sorts of things. Unfortunately, if they are published somewhere, I haven't come across them yet, but it'd be nice to see that. They go on to talk about increases in these other unusual reasons. Surprisingly, the anti-vaxxer movement showing up there, but once again without percentages. You can't really tell from these sorts of stories how large a component. Is it 3% of people getting divorced because of anti-vaxxer type and conspiracy theories? Is it 5? Is it 10? Are these big ones 80 and 90%, and these are all 10%? It's a hard you just can't do it, and there's no point guessing. In my experience, you never get anywhere near what the truth ends up being when you're just guessing or assuming. So, but the point of putting it up here is to, I guess, highlight the work that I do, in the sense of, as I mentioned, the major theme, I guess you could argue, of the video was communication and interpretation, and compatibility. And it's interesting that you see lack of communication and compatibility showing up here. Not saying it's the entire reason, of course, as there are others, but when you're facing these kinds of difficulties in life, you need these other areas to be working in their optimal way, so that you are a united team effort. Raising kids is a team effort. Surviving financially in a relationship is a team effort. And it's no good if you've got these kinds of difficulties in relationships that are very often born of ignorance and continue to be bred in ignorance. And just a little bit of information at the right time, in the right way, makes such a difference to people's relationships. So I can't emphasise that enough. Anyway, I've made my point. I'll end the addendum here and leave you with that thought. You can obviously find this news report if you just Google unusual reasons Australian marriages, divorce, etc. I've 10. I think it was 10 now that I found this on their website, but it's they're quoting Harold's Son here, so you'll find it quite easily if you do a quick Google search. Okay, tuning out. Thanks for watching. Leave you with it, guys. Catch you on the next one.